Tibet is on the front line of the climate crisis. The Tibetan Plateau, as we know, as the roof of the world and the third pole due to its vast repository of fresh water from its glaciers after the two poles is slowly melting away. Tibet is also the source of Asia's major river system that are today being threatened by the Chinese government's building of dams on these rivers, sabotaging the lives and food security of nearly 1.4 billion people living in the downstream countries. The ecosystem of Tibetan Plateau is fragile and sensitive to climate change, affecting regional and global weather patterns, river flows and biodiversity. To bring attention to the current climate crisis in Tibet, 5 exiled Tibetan women delegates participated in the COP26, the United Nations' biggest platform where world leaders deliberate on climate change. This year, the climate change conference was held in Glasgow, Scotland.
Representatives from more than 160 nations are signing a historic climate agreement now at the United Nations. It aims to limit global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius.
If we don't take action, the collapse of our civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon.
Climate change is the biggest threat to our generation. The risks that we face from climate change is our existence.
The climate crisis has not been in quarantine.
Let's raise our shared ambition and turn the tide on climate change.
There's no planet B. There is no planet blah, 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 blah.
Gentle nudge on a Glasgow day in November. What happened this weekend was that the people had their say, loud and clear.
COP26 is the iteration of the Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. This annual meeting brings together 197 members of the convention to take concerted action on the climate change. This year's COP is the most significant climate meeting since 2015, when the Paris Agreement was signed. Countries are now expected to agree on a set of robust guidelines for the implementation of the agreement. These include rules on how to measure and report each country's carbon emissions and how to increase ambitions over the time. The fact that Tibet is still under the brutal occupation of the Chinese government makes it difficult for the Tibetans to get through these conferences to table their voices and concern on environmental degradation in Tibet. Nevertheless, for the last 10 years, some of the Tibetans who live in exile managed to meet the attendee leaders and voice their concern regarding the environmental degradation that is taking place in Tibet at a rapid pace.
Now, the Tibet people's participation at the UN Climate Summit dates back to 1992, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama was invited at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. And at that point of time, the Environment Desk, which I have been heading since 2014, was actually founded. The Environment Desk also brought out a book publication on Tibet's environment at that year also, to coincide with the Rio Earth Summit, where His Holiness was to speak. So that was probably the first ever Tibetan participated at a UN Climate Summit to speak on Tibet's environment. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama is what we can say is the first Tibetan to participate at a UN Climate Summit, and the Environment Desk is the first organization to participate at the UN Climate Summit. Then we had a proper participation or a continuous participation at the UN Climate Summit since 2009, when then head of the Environment Desk, Tibettv Nobula, led a team of Tibetans and Tibetan representatives at the Copenhagen UN Climate Summit. Since then, we have been continuously and consistently participating at the UN Climate Summit.
Not many people know Tibet is also known as the third pole, as some refer to Tibet as the Hindu Kush glaciers. The Tibetan research on Tibet's environment might argue that there is still a lot to explore and do research on the plateau. It can be argued that the global climate change phenomenon is seeping through the highest and the lowest of land due to the human activities. And in case of Tibet, the excess mining of minerals and cutting down of trees and construction of dams by the Chinese government in Tibet, intensifying the rate of global warming.
Due to warming of the earth, there are like number of incidents happening in Tibet. So, such as since 2016, Tibet has seen a number of natural disasters. In 2016, in central Tibet, in Yusang region, there was a number of natural disasters like landslide and our glacier avalanche. So, and other than this, there also in Amdo region, there were numbers of droughts happen in this region, and in Kham region there were a number of floods. So we can see that there are consequently happening of natural disaster all around Tibet. So we can clearly see that this is not the first time that Tibet is facing such disasters, and since 1960s we can see that the glaciers on the Tibetan plateau are melting. And the temperature on the Tibetan plateau is warming twice that of the global average. So it is evident that the global warming have a huge impact on the Tibetan plateau. The Tibetan plateau itself is very important, not only for the Tibet. It has around 46,000 glaciers, which are source of water resources for the Asian countries. And all these rivers, major rivers of Asia, it has its source in Tibet. Therefore, Tibet is known by different names, Water Tower of Asia, the Third Pole, the Rainmaker, and there are different names given to Tibet. So this all clearly signifies how important Tibetan plateau is. However, even though Tibetan themselves have never contributed to this global warming, but however the changes of the global temperature have huge impact on the Tibetan people, the indigenous people who are living on the land. And the Tibetan being the highest plateau, they have the most severe consequences of those global warming. And there are glaciers are melting.
What this all means for Tibetans on the ground is it becomes much harder to really subsist off the land, to protect yourselves and your animals and to provide for yourselves. And in the long run, it also means that Tibet's biodiversity is really under threat. And the biodiversity of Tibet is quite rich and unique just because of the geography of Tibet. And not enough is understood about it, so we risk losing the opportunity to learn more about Tibet's biodiversity as well.
In Tibet, hundreds of Tibetan environmental activists have been arrested over the last 2 decades as China scaled up its mining, infrastructure and urbanization projects. Many have paid a heavy price to protect the environment, some have served long-term prison sentences, and many have been subject to torture. Some have even died in Chinese custody. Experts are of the view that the Tibetans and their collective knowledge need to be part of any environmental or climate policy in Tibet. Tibetans have lived in Tibet for centuries and they are the natural and traditional frontline defenders. They are closely connected to the land physically and spiritually and have access to the breadth of accumulated knowledge on the critically important ecosystem.
Now, this might sound religious to some extent, but there are scientists who have clearly stated that The concept of sacred mountains that we Tibetans follow has greatly supported in the protection of Tibet's environment for lots of thousands of years. How it has done is, we consider our most glaciated peak as a sacred. We consider source of a river as a sacred. We consider a hill station or a valley that with a diverse forest coverage as a sacred. So we have considered sacred a place that has a diverse and very rich ecosystem, which inevitably helps in protection of Tibet's environment or the mountainous environment. And also we have immense respect for the environment. So we try to do minimum damage to the environment. So we give the land as the honor, and we seek permission from the land for whatever we do. So that concept has definitely helped the protection of the land and mitigation of the environment impact.
And there are a few studies that have examined how Tibetans alter their relationships to nature or their practices on the grasslands to adapt to changing conditions. So how Tibetans respond to grassland degradation. There are some studies that show that Tibetans have recognized that you can use yaks to step on seeds. And the yaks also release, they capture a lot of seeds in their wool, and in stepping on seeds that have been planted and sowed, they also drop other seeds of other species, and so you're not getting monocultural grass. You're getting a sort of diverse range of grass seeds that grow, which leads to a healthier ecosystem. So I think Tibetans will have many more examples of this, but we need to do more to really make sure that the experience that we've accumulated is recorded and shared.
And those relocated nomads, even though Chinese government claim that it is for the poverty alleviation, but Chinese government should, take the opinion of those nomads, whether they want to move or not. It is up to them to, self-determination rights. People have their own self-determination rights. So they are the one who should, decide whether they want to move or not. It shouldn't be the Chinese government who will forcefully relocate them and, make them dependent on these government subsidies.
In September 2019, IPCC, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has raised the alarm on the state of the environment of the Tibetan Plateau, especially on the Tibet's glacial meltdown, in their special report on the ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate. Some of the major findings in the report are: 36% of the glaciers along the Hindu Kush and Himalayan range will be gone by 2100, even if the global warming is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius. If emissions are not cut, the loss increases to 2/3. A quarter of ice on the Earth's third pole, which is Tibet, has been lost since 1970, and up to 2/3 of the region's remaining glaciers are on the track to disappear by the end of the century. The Nyenjantala mountain range in Tibet, which has its highest point to the northwest of Lhasa, is singled out as being particularly adversely affected. Severe degradation and thawing of permafrost in Tibet during the past few decades, projected to continue, have contributed to the changing the seasonal activities, abundance and distribution of ecologically, culturally and economically important plant and animal species, ecological disturbances and ecosystem functioning. The IPCC stated, the release of toxic contaminants, particularly where glacial melts waters are used for irrigation and drinking water in the Himalayas and Andes, is potentially harmful to human health both now and in the future. Intensive and increased glacier surge activity due to warming has been noticed in the region of western Tibet, along with the higher risk of complete glacier collapses. The IPCC shared an example of twin glacier collapses with 9 fatalities in the Aru range in Tibet in 2016. Despite the fragility of the high-altitude ecosystem and the stark threats spelled out by the IPCC, China has intensified infrastructure construction across Tibet to further open up the landscape and extract Tibet's natural resources. Such projects include a network of strategic railroads and major damming and hydropower projects. including researchers from the Environment Desk, Tibet Policy Institute of Central Tibetan Administration. The Tibetan delegate at the COP26 made a 5-point appeal. Number 1. Recognize the global ecological importance of the Tibetan Plateau. Number 2. Strengthen climate change research on Tibetan Plateau. Number 3. Respect traditional knowledge and way of life. Number 4. Strictly regulate urbanization and tourism. Number 5. Global Citizen Action for Tibet's Environment. Tibet Policy Institute, along with the 4 other Tibetan non-governmental organizations such as International Tibet Network, International Campaign for Tibet, Tibet Watch, and Students for Free Tibet, came up with a joint action plan as well.
Until 2015, 2025, we, the Tibetans, or the Central Tibetan Administration, or the Tibetan representatives should carry forward a campaign where we can ask the governments to organize parliament hearings, government hearings, so that a resolution in different governments can be passed on the importance of Tibet's environment.
World leaders, they should also recognize that, like the indigenous knowledge of those Tibetan people who are living on this region. So there are many, like the people, nomadic people, they know this land and they know how to protect and how to, restore from the, restore this environment.
While we cannot reverse the damage, we can make changes in slowing things down, reducing negative impacts of material and infrastructural development on this earth. We as a citizen of the world must not fail to protect one of the most crucial yet neglected places on this earth, Tibet or the Third Pole.